My name is Mark Lightowler, and I'm the CEO of Phorix. We're a behavioral change design agency based in Switzerland and London. And I've just finished recording the Leadership Café podcast with Richard Citrin and Michael Couch. On the podcast, you'll hear a little bit about my leadership journey and some interesting insights into areas like belonging, why you need to take risks in your career, about the need to build vulnerable organizations in the future, things about the Great Resignation, and maybe some behavioral tips around building psychological safety and rebuilding culture. Along the way, you'll also hear about digital health, medical technology, and our whole part of humanity and our need to change.
Well, thank you for joining us for another edition of the Leadership Cafe, where we talk to extraordinary people leading remarkable businesses and doing remarkable things. We're your hosts. I'm Michael Couch.
And I'm Richard Citrin, and we're so glad to be joined today by Mark Lightowler. Mark is across the pond. He's president, founder, and CEO of the Phorix Group with headquarters in London and France. And today, Mark is with us from France. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having us.
Mark, your work is really on the edge of healthcare, behavior change, digital therapeutics, all of that work. Your background says it, understanding behavior, creating change. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, going from a scientist to a marketeer to an entrepreneur, and the successes you've had, and a bit about the Phorix Group as well?
Sure. I'm a chemist by training, believe it or not, but I would be extremely dangerous if they let me back in the lab. So they're good that they decided not to. But yes, I spent a long time as a scientist working on medicinal chemistry, and I followed a pathway into pharmaceuticals from there. I worked in sales, I worked in clinical development, I worked in publications, I worked in many areas, and had about 25 years working in that healthcare arena, looking at different diseases, from rare diseases to really common ones, hypertension, to really rare ones in bleeding disorders. So a broad background in that area. But I think what's kind of spurred me on as we were thinking through that time, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, was the rise of digital technology and how that might change healthcare. And so I got very interested in what that might be and how that might help us. And along that way, we were also trying to think about what makes people change. And so that became a little bit of a quest. And so I decided to leave a big pharmaceutical company, which is a big risk at that stage. So I'm a good part of my career. I'm not young anymore. And so I decide, I think there's something fundamentally about to change. And I want to go away and build capabilities inside that. And that part was around behavioral change. In the end, I think one thing for healthcare, but I think it goes across a lot of their areas, is about how and why we change. And if we think about healthcare, of course, we want people to change their health habits. We want people to be more active. We want people to get better. We want people to take their medicines. And it's all about change. As a chemist, it's really good to think about, biological change. But then I've spent 20 odd years looking at doctors and looking at patients and looking at the dialogue between them and seeing a lot of broken pieces there. And then interestingly, when we look at that, is I see a lot of broken things in culture and corporate culture working in a big area. So we also work in that area too. So yes, a very interesting career going from scientist into behavioral scientist. And so that's what Phorix looks at. We would call ourselves a behavioral change design agency. We use design thinking, we use strategy, we work with corporate leaders in the healthcare and other industries, and we look at why people will change and what might block them from change. and then we help people work through those pieces. And along the way, we'll probably discuss some of the areas that we think about that. So we're working in mental health, and we're also working oddly in the metaverse as well. We can probably maybe touch base on that in a bit.
Mark, I'm wondering about this career path you've had. I'm wondering how many of your chemist colleagues from 25 years ago are still at the bench versus those who have made a career shift. In our work, we find that people who are able to make those transitions show a certain kind of a learning agility and ability to learn from their experiences in life and then apply them in new and novel kinds of ways. I mean, you don't know too many of your chemist friends who have had the same kind of career path for you. What do you think, or perhaps you do? Let me ask that as a question. If you don't, what's been unique about your insights and your perceptions about yourself as a leader that perhaps helped you achieve some of those?
Yeah, great questions, Richard. I would say it's the minority of people that are still chemists, academic chemists, or even industrial chemists. There are definitely a few people. It's 30 years next year that I got my PhD. I was just talking to my PhD supervisor. He's still working as a professor in Bristol University. So that's fantastic. I would go to something very early on in my career. I probably was about 22, and one of the professors was explaining what he thought a PhD did for him, what education did for him in the future. And he said, you'll learn a bunch of stuff, but it's all fairly irrelevant. He said, what you will get from this is a way of thinking that may be different from how other people think. It may give you more structure in the way that you think. And whether that's an MBA, an MSc, a BA, or whatever it is, I think that's what education gives you. Apart from the subject matter expertise, I think it gives you some structure. And certainly I took that into my career. And I think that's helped me be structured in my approach to all the things that we do. So I think that's been really important. I think the other thing that's helped me as a leader is about the ability as an introvert, which I am naturally, to take risks. So I'm a little bit odd that, I'm definitely introverted. I prefer to sit in the library and read books. But on the other side, you'll see me on stage because I have something that says you need to take risks. That adage, do something that you feel dangerous every day, I think also works for me. And that's pushed me mentally into places to take an opportunity. And I think that's definitely helped my career. Taking that leap, the jump, is never easy for anyone. A lot of people think long and hard about it, as they should. But you'll only progress if you take that leap. And then I would say midway through my career, that the one comment that sticks in my mind, and you'll know him very well, is Marshall Goldsmith. And I met Marshall on a course, and I found it fascinating. And he wrote a book called What Got You There, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And that's the kind of mid-career transition. It's a permission to say, if I'm a chemist, I don't have to be a chemist all my life. I can be a leader, I can be a manager, I can be something else. But I'm going to have to learn other skill sets to get me to that next phase. And I'm probably in the, if our careers are 3 or 4 part phases for us, and maybe 10 part phases for our children,
yes,
I'm probably on my fourth part phase of reinventing myself and doing that. And reinventing yourself, I think, is difficult, but necessary. Yes. And I think is liberating, allows you to be something else as you progress through. You get to some sort of mastery of things, and then you allow yourself to become incompetent at things and learn again. And maybe that's, I like being incompetent and learning again.
Yeah. Well, your story is almost a perfect example of what our research and our experiences uncovered about what it takes to create good leaders. And one of the key things is, adults don't learn unless there's some risk. There's a little bit of heat involved, but also the fact that you intentionally, you have a structure and you're intentional about how you're approaching things. That also accelerates learning, also accelerates change too. So we've seen that throughout our discussions with the great, remarkable people we've been talking to. Careers are not these single little, paths that we take. The most interesting people bounce around, do different things, take risks, but they learn from those risks. They may even fail, but they learn from the failures as well. Does that seem to resonate with you too, as far as what a successful career might look like?
Yes, I think it is. And I think it is, especially these days. I mean, maybe I'm lucky at my age, 54, that we're allowed to do that we've had the flexibility to do that we've been given that neuroplasticity to be allowed to do that. And if you think about, the agility of our parents, where a career was much more a career for life, that I think had been removed very early on and would be much more risky and hard for them to mentally countenance doing. Whereas I think, maybe difficult for us, and it'd probably be much easier for our children. But, everything's changed since I was, since I started work, that everything has changed. And I think being able to reinvent yourself for things that you didn't know existed at the time you started work is I think, a luxury.
Well, and we're blowing up some assumptions too. The idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, we've got several old dogs on here. Richard and I started a whole new life and practice and late in life too, just as you do. But it's great for us now to think, oh, wait a minute, there is neuroplasticity. We can learn. And particularly, again, if you're intentional about it and you thrive on different experiences, that's fantastic.
I was doing some coaching yesterday with a fellow who was 48 years old, and he was thinking about leaving his company and starting on an entrepreneurial venture. And he said, I'm 48. This is going to be my last shot. And I said, hold on. It's far from your last shot. It may be your first big failure. There may be other opportunities. So those perceptions are changing. Mark, and as you talk about the changes that you went through and the neuroplasticity, I imagine the same principles apply to the work that you're doing in another area, really, which is kind of the cutting edge around digital therapeutics and looking at these issues of behavior change. And I know you're also, and as a psychologist, I have to say that I'm so amazed and grateful for the perceptions we're seeing now in the workplace and really in the world around issues of behavioral health, kindness, friendship, loneliness. I know is an area that you're very much interested in, and these are issues that also involve change for people that may be hard for them to do. Can you talk a little bit about that work that you're doing? I think it's so important for organizations and really, I would say our world to look at some of these themes and how we can begin to address them.
Yeah, no, the behavioral health side, if we start there, I think is fascinating about what we might be able to create with and without pharmacology. I mean, no one really wants to take pills if they don't have to. So what if we could do things with, that crazy little thing? I mean, maybe we use it too much, but a phone in our pocket can tell us so many different things that are going on. So I'm very interested in, digital biosignals. So what can we pick up? I'm also very interested in changing the world from wearables. I mean, I have an Apple Watch on, but I'd love it if I didn't have to have that permanently strapped to my wrist to track things. I mean, maybe we can turn it into invisibles. I think that's when we really get change, when we don't have to have things that are digital, things that are omnipresent all the time. Most people don't want to be reminded of their ill health or their potential ill health. They need things that are going to nudge them along. So I use the analogy of autonomous driving cars. So, you have a car and it looks like it's driving in a straight line or, on a path, but it's being nudged a million times a second. It's driving all over the place, but it's driving all over the place in a very tight frame line. And if you think about healthcare could do the same thing. If we had a lot more nudges rather than some big bumps, diabetes, big bumps, cancer, big bumps, we may be able to head off at the pass a few things. People really want to get from a different perspective, and people have said it, and this isn't me, we need to move from sick care to healthcare. We need to move to a point where we are in wellness. We'll always have people that get diseases. We will always need to treat people with diseases, with accidents and those things. But the majority of people will still be able to live a longer, better, healthier life if we're able to help them make choices along the day. Now, we make millions of choices along the day, and that leads us to behavioral change. So I'm interested in being a choice architect. And so in behavioral science terms, we're all choice architects. We all choose, and we have an architecture around us that chooses. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And it's based on our experiences, our exposure, and our stimuli. So we can, in some ways, inform that and help to make better choices, whether it's food or exercise or taking medication or mindfulness, which I know both of you look at, resilience, those kind of things help us develop our own tool sets. So they're good, and that's why I started studying behavioral science. How can we look at the science of behavior and use that to help change? And then we amalgamate that with digital tools, because if we want to make change, as you'll know, making something a habit takes repetition. We need to experience the same sort of response with consistency, and eventually that becomes a habit. So if we want to nudge people into those choices and make them, we have to have quite a high touch rate. And so it's been a failure up until now, behavioral change, because we haven't been able to get close enough to people with diseases and the choices that they make at the time that they make them, back to choice architecture. But with digital tools, we can get closer to it. So we can help remind people, if I'm doing my shopping, I can get reminders about putting the right things in the basket. And it's just that going from automatic thinking, system one, Kahneman kind of system one, to reflective thinking. How do I get into that making a choice for the right reasons? So we're not about behavioral change or about changing people's behavior for unethical reasons. We're all about ethical change, which is when people want to make change, because if you don't want to make change, you're not going to. But if you want to make change, we need evidence-based ethical ways of helping people make change. And digital tools are great ways of doing that. We've seen great success with weight management, with sleep, with addiction, with a lot of neuropsychiatry pieces. But we're starting to see that come down into oncology with cancer and people being looked after at home. So I think there's a vast range of opportunities to deploy digital technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning in the right way, and gradually help people make better choices. And that also works for doctors too. So it also works for the practice of medicine. Practice of medicine is full of biases. It's who we are, how tired we are, and those kind of things. We need great doctors. We don't need AI doctors on their own, although they'll help. But we need to bring these things together. And again, we need to help choice architecture. Can we make things better that way? So I'm really interested in that side of things. And I think that then, became a really big passion about human behavior, humanity, and then how do we think about those things. And then you asked about loneliness, Richard, and I think when we apply some of those techniques back to diversity, inclusion, and we think about culture, then some of those things are exactly the same. We look to the reasons why people don't feel like they're able to belong. One of those reasons we think is loneliness. It's not just us. Many people have been researching it for many years. And it looks like, especially, not just especially, but in America, 50% of the workforce, it feels somewhat lonely. And so that's a massive impact. $400 billion a year attributed to loneliness, over $2,000 per employee who is affected by loneliness, cost to the employer. So there's something interesting for us to think about. And I'm interested in the point of how do we change that?
Yeah. I love this example you've given, because it's almost the perfect example of where real innovation comes from. You've talked about behavioral economics, nudges, neuroscience, technology, AI, healthcare. So this great new idea comes not from a flash of brilliance, but a combination of existing ideas that really make a difference and make an impact. So I just wanted to comment on that. It's just an amazing story of innovation. But I also, your point about loneliness and belonging, I was just reading a very broad study done by McKinsey. And they were looking at the great attrition, which I understand we're here in the United States, you're experiencing it in Europe, that when you asked leaders why these people were leaving, they said, oh, a better job with more money. If you asked the people who left, it was belonging. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was appreciated. So culture factors. So, executives are saying, oh, they're being drawn away by pay. Employees are saying, I'm being driven away by culture. And so I think that idea of, so what do we need to do in terms of creating change around that will really make a difference in dealing with this one of these economic issues around attrition. Do you see it that way as well?
Yes, absolutely. And as we were saying in the pre-conversation, I'm also really worried about the people who haven't left, who want to leave, but can't afford to leave. So lots of people have not the luxury, but the ability, let's say, to say, I'm going to take time off, or I'm going to get another job and leave, because of culture and a mismatch between their culture and their expectation of culture and what's being present in the company. But there's a whole bunch of people who can't do that, who can't leave, and who are just sucking it up. And actually, they're the ones that we're going to be paying for in terms of mental health and health care issues. Back to loneliness. Loneliness raises cortisol levels, and let's break away just a second for loneliness and say it's a word, and it really means the feeling of not being seen at work, not being heard at work, not feeling like I'm working on the right things, not feeling like I have companionship, not feeling like people are around me. And a bunch of other things that causes some pain. It also causes biological response. It raises cortisol levels, and those cortisol levels are stress hormones. So we all know what that stress leads to. So loneliness in that aspect, I don't feel like I belong, which is where you said quite rightly, Michael, turns into healthcare issues and turns into anxiety, and in some cases into anxiety and depression. But even if it doesn't do that, it turns it into a part where people aren't fully able to be present. So I'm really interested in this part of my true self versus my work self, and what's the difference between the two. How do I turn up to fully being at work myself? And that's, I think, most people's goals of inclusion, because I want people to turn up as themselves and feel able to do that, whatever those reasons are. And so I think we have to think through, how do we change that? How do we change it for an individual who may feel like that? We need to take stress out because we'll end up with better productivity. Mm-hmm. But also, how do we change that for leaders? How do we change that for management? And I'll give you an example. I turned up into a different country after being promoted to a dream job. So I moved country, language, and function all at the same time. And I had no one around me. I didn't have friends. I'd left all of those people. I had to build all of that anew. I had a very good home life. Home life was fine. So there's a big distinction between problems at home and problems at work. And loneliness is at home as well, but it's a different story. So we'll leave that for the time being and stay with culture, workplace culture. So I think it took me until I got good mentorship and found other people. And I would say that was a good 2 or 3 years of my first experience of being in a different country was, am I doing the right thing? I built a good career afterwards, but many people I saw left. I would say about 30 or 40% never lasted more than 2 years because they had this feeling that they didn't belong there. Yep. An imposter syndrome. And I think I've privately talked to Richard about this. So I've always said, I feel like I've always been an imposter all my life, you know, lucky to be a PhD, lucky to get a good job, lucky to get a job with a car, lucky to get all of these things, and lucky to be an entrepreneur. And it's maybe it's a protective mindset that pushes you on to become good at things. But many people flounder with that if they don't have resilience behind them. I think they flounder through those things. I think I'm lucky. I have resilience probably in buckets from sport and coaching.
So, Mark, tell us then, what would be some things that you would say to managers or leaders in organizations around the behaviors that they could engage with their employees who, you know, as you said, may still be there and can't leave, or employees who are experiencing loneliness, or just the, you know, kind of the post-pandemic experiences that we're all having? What would be some behavioral actions that you would recommend to leaders and managers?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first part of building back culture, which I think everyone has to do, whether you had a good culture before and everyone loved being in the office, I think times have changed. People have had a different experience, and I think you've got to build back culture. So I think number one for me is the old culture doesn't exist anymore. You have to build it again. And it's an opportunity, it's not a chore. It's an opportunity to do something great, and to do something even better for your team and employees. It's the company's job, and it's the individual's job too. It's a joint job. It can't be a company edict. We're going to have a great culture. I don't think that will work. So it's got to be first step of psychological safety for me is inclusion. So you're going to have to get through the point of we're going to have to listen to people. And so I think it's worthwhile understanding and naming emotions. So is there fear in the team? Is there loneliness in the team? Is there joy? Is there happiness? And what levels do we have of those? And how do we track those and use those as metrics over time to adjust our culture? We have to think from behavioral terms. If you think about behavior, the way you change behavior, very simple in 3 seconds is you need the capability, opportunity, and motivation. So this COM-B model that came out of a meta model from UCL in London. And so it's a very good way of thinking about it. It's not just enough to tell people to change. We can educate, this might be happening, you might be able to do this, and give people skills, physical and psychological, but we also want to be able to give people the opportunity to fully engage, and we want people to have the motivation. So I think we have to go holistic in our approach. So my advice to leaders would be look holistically at what may need to happen with culture, and then dive into a bunch of these. I think mindfulness, resilience, think you need to look and understand about belonging. I will say I think you have to look at loneliness. I think it's a big underthought about. It may be thought as negative, but I think it's a route to the positive. I think we have to think about building back trust. Trust for me comes through humanity. It comes through transparency. It comes through reproducibility and the capability of the organization. When you have trust, I think you will have built a vulnerable organization. And I think that's probably the biggest change that we can put into workplace 2.0, 3.0, wherever we are. is coming back with a vulnerable workforce who are happy not to share sad stories. That's not what I mean by vulnerability. Who are happy to talk about failure, who are happy to talk about fears, who are happy to say, I don't know how this is going to go, but I think we should go there. We don't have all the answers anymore. We have to build anew. And that, if we're vulnerable with that approach, I think we'll have people come with us and want to build it.
Good.
Great, thank
But
you.
phenomenal. Mark, we'll ask you the question that we ask every one of the guests on the cafe, because it's been such a phenomenal insights that we've gained from it. But you've touched on it a little bit here, but instead of asking people, what the pandemic has done to you, we ask people, to quickly say, all right, what has the pandemic done for you?
Two immediate things. I had time with my children and my wife, and being here. Time, I have a 16-year-old, was a 16-year-old, he's now 18, just finished his exams. I have a 16-year-old now, who obviously was 14, and now a 10-year-old. So I've had a time where I've seen children, my family, and us grow and have time together. I don't think we could ever pay for that. And yes, it was in awful circumstances. Yes, we're blessed that we were all right, and we've come out of it all right. So I think that's, that has to be number one. I think after that, the freedom, and I love the word freedom. I think it breaks into two things: freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from the things that I had to do, and I thought I had to do, but actually I didn't, because when I stopped doing them, nothing actually disintegrated. And also the freedom to think about things that I just didn't have the time to think about. One of those things came into mental health. We weren't working in that space, but it came to be very important. I found it was very important to me and other people around, and obviously probably primed by people's issues and having to, talk to people probably as a scientist about the pandemic, but also helping people along the way. And that made me go and do a very small course, and I wish I could do more, and I will do more, as a mental health first aider. And so the ability to be able to be to be able to spot something. I'm not a qualified psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I can spot something and then help people get into the right place. But it gave me insights into doing some of those things.
Great.
And so that's been, I think those two things have been a blessing.
Good. So if people want to be able to connect with you, Mark, what's the best way they can do that?
They can look at the phorixgroup.com.
Phorix Group.
The phorixgroup.com, all one word. And dead easy to get hold of me, because it's mark@thephorixgroup.com.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being with us here on the Leadership Cafe. It's been great hearing about some quite innovative practices right on the cutting edge here that I think will make a big difference. So we'll be publishing, you'll can find the cafe on all your favorite places you like to look to find your favorite podcasts, including Richard and I's website. We want to make sure we thank our producer, director, technologist extraordinaire, Chad Barr, with the Chad Barr Group, for making sure all the good stuff happens in the background. So for all of us at the Leadership Cafe, thanks for joining in. I'm Michael Couch.
I'm Richard Citron, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Leadership Cafe.